World Bank has put out a report on the risks of automation and what that will mean as far as job losses are concerned. And this is a serious issue for countries like India, Bangladesh, etc. What is the transition period that you believe that this is going to really sort of hit hard countries like India?
Well, it depends. It depends on who you talk to, and many of the entrepreneurs who are building these technologies, these 3D printing technologies, they're maybe a little bit too optimistic about how quickly it will come. But I think that without question, in 10 or 15 years, you're going to see major shifts in the jobs that young people find as they leave school. We did a very kind of informal study of graduates of Dartmouth College, where I was president for a few years. And from 2000 to 2005, we surveyed the graduates of Dartmouth. So the students who'd graduated from Dartmouth in the year 2000, by 2005, 40% of them were in jobs that did not exist in 2000. So the kinds of jobs are changing quickly. So whether it happens in 5, 10, or 15 years, what we're telling governments is, if you want to be prepared for that future, you have to think about the young children. Because the most important years in terms of developing the neural connections that will be your human capital into the future is the first 1,000 days. And we're saying to governments that if you're not doing the right things in those first 1,000 days, that error is going to stay with you for 30, 40, 50 years. And so whatever the time scale of the automation changes, every single government has to switch now and prepare for having the workforce of the future.
And you're seeing that responsiveness?
Yes. So in Pakistan, in Indonesia, where we went and specifically said Pakistan has 45% childhood stunting, Indonesia has 37% childhood stunting. They're literally on emergency footing trying to bring those rates of childhood stunting down. Here in Bangladesh, they've already made a lot of progress, and we've just announced a $1 billion additional investment in childhood stunting, which we will work on very aggressively with this government. I'm telling every country in the world, if you have 30, 35, 40% childhood stunting, you cannot expect to walk into a future where the drivers of growth, the paths toward economic growth are uncertain, and expect that you'll be able to compete. China has less than 10% stunting. The other East Asian economies have close to 0% stunting. Countries are making progress all over the world. If you don't have top class human capital, you're not going to be ready for the uncertainty of what jobs in the future will look like.
Speaking of infrastructure and speaking of China, Xi Jinping here in Bangladesh a couple of days ago making a big commitment, and that seems to be their strategy, this infrastructure diplomacy that China seems to be deploying quite effectively at this point in time. But what is the sense that you get about the China story itself? I mean, we've seen volatility for the currency today, quite significant, but what's the sense that you get about the China story?
Well, we see China making a very difficult transition with great determination. It was the China 2030 report that they did with us, where they really, for the first time, explicitly outlined all the stages of their economic transformation. And so it's not an easy thing to say, we're going to shift the drivers of growth from investment and exports to consumption and services. But they're actually doing it. So you're seeing services now significantly more than 50% of the economy. Consumption continues to grow, and they continue to stay the course. So now, are there weaknesses in the economy? Is private sector, so-called private sector indebtedness is high? Yes, there are many things that one could point to as potential weaknesses. But I'll tell you, the Chinese are completely aware of what those weaknesses are. They're working to try to tackle them. President Xi in the G20 leaders meeting announced a major reduction in steel production, a major reduction in coal production. They're listening to what's happening in the world, and they're responding. There was the incident last August, where a relatively minor adjustment in the exchange rate regime led to panic around the world. Well, if you see what happened afterwards, Premier Li Keqiang and Central Bank Governor Zhou Xiaochuan said, okay, we get it. We need to communicate better. And boy, they have been communicating so much more clearly. It takes time to get your head around just how big an impact China has on the global economy. And so this is their learning process. I don't right now see a hard landing for China. I think they're managing the transition very effectively. They still have plenty of reserves. So what we're hoping is that China will continue to evolve, continue to look for new drivers of growth. And let me tell you, China is the one country that every year and a half or so gives us the assignment of working with them to alter something very significant in their economy. The first was with my predecessor, Bob Zoellick. And you should read the report, China 2030. It was a brilliant report done with the National Development Research Council, and it outlines exactly what China was going to do, in the next 5, 10, 15 years to shift its path of economic growth. Then they asked us to do a report on urbanization, and they're now moving to take the findings in the report and put them into practice. We just finished a report on healthcare. China has rapidly increasing healthcare costs, and they want to fundamentally shift the healthcare system. We're going to work with them on doing that. And the next assignment, the fourth assignment that we've gotten from them, is determining what the new drivers of economic growth for China will be. Now, here is China growing at 6%, and because of the size of the economy, it's a third of global growth.
Sure.
They're the ones who are asking us most aggressively to help them find the new drivers of economic growth. We wish every one of our clients was that aggressive and that thoughtful about what it was going to do going forward.
You're talking about aggression and thoughtfulness in terms of the future. You talked about how governments need to be paranoid about the future. Speaking of paranoia, what should the Indian government be paranoid about? You've just come back from India a couple of months ago, and I know you're confident about the India story, but what should the Indian government be paranoid about specifically today?
Well, I think the Indian growth story is one of the great positive stories in the world today. I've said many, many times that the reforms that Prime Minister Modi has committed to, the very positive attitude that he's taken into making really very difficult reforms. The goods and services tax is one of them. Now, we know that there are complexities in the GST that still have to be worked out, but the spirit, the can-do spirit that he's brought has had a tremendously positive impact. But on my last visit, I did tell Prime Minister Modi that I was very worried about stunting rates of 38.7%. I mean, you can make up some of it with a great educational system, but those children will never reach their full potential. I believe that India now can take advantage of the extraordinary high value that Indians place on education to really foment a revolution in the way they deal with the first 1,000 days on into the future. They're doing many of these things right now. Swachh Bharat is, in fact, one of the main drivers of stunting, because children are almost in a constant state of diarrhea. And his aggressive approach to Swachh Bharat is a really important part of that. But we think they can move even more quickly. And we're now working with them to try to accelerate that process. So that's one thing. I think that India can move much more quickly in fulfilling Prime Minister Modi's dream of 300 gigawatts of solar energy. And again, that's one of the things we're working with them on. They're now poised to put online a lot of coal, but Prime Minister Modi and other leaders have told us that they're ready to switch if the financing for renewable energy, especially solar, can be made much more affordable. So we want to do that with them. Prime Minister Modi is so ambitious when it comes to making a contribution on climate change. We can't let something like cost of capital get in the way. Now, it's going to be politically tricky to make it happen, but we're committed to working with them to do it.
Well, speaking of politically tricky, one issue that, of course, is sensitive at this point in time is the Indus Water Treaty. There's been a lot of talk around a possible reworking, even abrogation. Of course, none of that has happened so far. Have you had any conversation with either the Indian government or the Pakistan government on the Indus Water Treaty?
We have a very limited role in the Indus Water Treaty. It's more of an administrative role. So our great hope is that over time that we will find a solution to the current to the current discussions and the current disagreements that will work for both parties. It is in everybody's interest. Not only Pakistan and India, but it is in the world's interest that we move toward a resolution of whatever differences that exist right now. Again, we have a very, very limited role. We just do a few things that are just based on the contract, and we will do everything we can to have the two parties come together and find a solution that works for both.
I know this is a sensitive issue, so I will not push you any further, but what would your key concern be if there were to be either a unilateral redrawing of the treaty?
Well, we want to do everything we can to ensure that the two parties come to an agreement that they can both agree on. And let me leave it at that.
Okay, perfect. So let me end then by asking you, we talked about some of the risks and the challenges that the world is faced with, but in terms of key opportunities that you believe that specifically emerging markets like India, developing countries and economies like Bangladesh should focus on as we look towards this 2030 goal that the World Bank has outlined, what would those opportunities be?
So again, it goes right back to the three things that we're focusing on. There's a tremendous opportunity to crowd in private capital. Capital is looking for return. Return exists in infrastructure projects that will be a win-win. There are not very many win-wins in the global economy today. So we can provide both better returns for capital and also build the infrastructure that's desperately needed. I think the other opportunity is to invest now, especially in your young people, but improve your education systems, improve your healthcare systems, because you don't want to be ready just for the next 2 years. You want to be ready for the next 15 and 20 years. Those are the countries that are going to do well over time. Invest in your people aggressively, effectively now. And finally, I think countries like India can take advantage of concern over things like forced displacement, climate change, even pandemics. There are funds out there now saying these are major global risks, and in order to protect the world from these major global risks, we have to invest more. And I think we'll find that investing more in India to mitigate carbon, to mitigate climate change through reducing carbon, working on things like making sure that whatever funds are available around even pandemics that will be utilized in India. This is another opportunity for developing countries. Developing countries that show that they're committed to helping the world build resilience against these major risks will do better in the future.
It's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for taking time out and speaking to us here in Bangladesh. Appreciate your presence here on CNBC TV 18.
Thanks, Shireen.
With that, it is time for us to wrap up the CNBC TV 18 special. From all of us here, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.